What Black Lives Matter does is sort of mathematically take raw differences. Like there are more cops in Black community. We earn slightly, but definitely less money, and then scream racism. And the reality is almost invariably more complex.
So before we move on to the protests which you're seeing at the moment, what are some of the stats which you regularly hear quoted, which you think are, I mean, you've given a list of some figures, but what are some others which you think are central to the narrative of the Black Lives Matter movement, which you think are misleading?
Just so many things. When you do social science, what you generally do is called multivariate regression analysis. I wouldn't give myself more than, say, a B+ or an A- at this, although I'm fairly good. I generally focus on linear, logistic, just the baselines you use in a research paper. But what you do is you take a dependent variable that you're interested in, such as income, and you look at all the things that could affect that: race, sure, but also class, age, region of the country, so on, in a sophisticated computer model where each is controlled at the median as you look at the effect of first one, then the second, then the third, so on down the line. With Black police shootings, the most obvious variable is how often people come into contact with the police and what the crime rate is. So this, again, is a controversial thing to discuss, but it's not widely disputed. If you look at what's called the Bureau of Justice Statistics annual report, comes out every year. Mr. Trump's administration did a good job. Mr. Obama's administration did a good job. What you'll see is that the Black violent crime rate is about 2.2 to 2.4 times the white crime rate. And this is as reported by victims, not by potentially crooked cops. The BJS is literally a survey of roughly 200,000 people by same race interviewers with whatever possible, absolutely anonymous, designed to figure out who in the country experienced crime. So that crime rate, and of course, whites dominate most corporate crimes. If you want to break this down racially, I don't see a reason to, but stock fraud isn't primarily something you associate with African Americans. I didn't see a single Black person in that Tiger King documentary. Yeah. But so at any rate, 2.4 times the victim reported crime rate leads to roughly the same number of encounters with police. And that is why there are more Black people shot by police. Like if you take a population percentage of 14 and you multiply that by 2.4, you get 31% or whatever. And that's exactly the upper bound of African Americans shot by the cops that we see in reality. So a lot of this is just extremely simple. I mean, if you look at the number of people shot by police, I wouldn't start out with an inherent assumption that certainly Hispanics or poor whites were less likely to get shot by the cops than Black people. But I mean, you very quickly find that that's not the case. There are very few differences between those groups. And if you do find that disproportion, that Black people make up 14% of the country, but 23% of those shot to be disturbing, you then have to adjust for crime rate. And once you do this, again, the differences vanish. Like when you talk about why there are more police in urban Black neighborhoods, it's not just because the cops decided to go mess with Black people. The way policing happens today, since the 1990s, it's been called the comp stat policing model. You ethically and legally have to send cops where there's the most crime. So as it happens, just as this would have been Irish American neighborhoods in the past, if you think about where the term paddy wagon came from and so on, today, most of those neighborhoods are African American neighborhoods, some Hispanic, Eastern European, et cetera, neighborhoods thrown in. And in all of those neighborhoods across race, you're going to see a higher proportion of police officers, and thus a higher proportion of police encounters. So it's absolutely understandable that if you're a law-abiding Black high school student who's a male and you live in one of these neighborhoods, you're going to feel harassed by the police. But again, the claim that the police are there because of racism or because they hate Blacks is absolutely invalid. The police go to the neighborhoods by rule that have the highest percentage of violent crime. And again, I think, frankly, discussing this, why are all these cops here? Well, because you guys had 27 shootings last month. I think that would really change the dynamic. What Black Lives Matter does is sort of mathematically take raw differences. Like there are more cops in Black community. We earn slightly, but definitely less money, and then scream racism. And the reality is almost invariably more complex.